peak, you're decent, you're mid, and you don't exist.
Box bites.
You know, I don't think Doug Lawrence gets enough credit for everything he's done for the SpongeBob brand. Not only does he voice one of the best characters in the show, while delivering some of its funniest running jokes, while writing some high-quality episodes that are beloved throughout the fandom, but he also took on the impossible porous task of trying to bring some class back to SpongeBob's cinematic catalog. I mean, what else can you expect from a man who insists on being called Mr.? He truly has professionalism leaking out of every orifice. So yeah, Plankton the Movie just released on Netflix, and it's pretty dang good. I wasn't expecting the world, and frankly, if I ever needed the world, it's not like this little speck would be able to get it for me. But surprisingly, I walked away with a sincere sense of satisfaction that I hadn't really felt towards SpongeBob in years, at least as far as the films are concerned. Aside from the first one where I could gush for hours about the opening logo alone, the SpongeBob movies have ranged from acceptable with a handful of premium parts, to mainstream mediocrity with a case of identity crisis, to... No, don't pop that one.
Let it suffocate.
But then comes this bold yet understated specimen strutting on in with his titular flick and blowing everyone out of the literal water. And the reason why it soars above the others is extremely simple. Something I didn't really give much thought to until I binged this quintet back to back. It's not because it has more show references or a legacy writer at the helm, or even just the simple fact that it's good and the others are bad. It's something a lot more tragic than that. But we'll get to that in a bit. First, I want to be a good chum and give this movie its flowers. So, Plankton is obviously the main star of this film, and they go elbow deep into his subconscious insecurities to pull out a really enjoyable story. Sure, it does step all over some pre-established continuity, but getting mad at SpongeBob for consistency hiccups really isn't worth anyone's time. Porous Robert has never really had the tightest lore in the world of cartoons, and usually as long as the characters and comedy are sharp, I'm willing to give it a pass. And trust me, they are both extremely sharp. In more ways than one. Plankton begins his adventure as the single-minded, single-celled mastermind who only cares about stealing the Krabby Patty formula and conquering the world, complete with an overly complex scheme and a pretty solid villain song to boot.
I'm Plankton, get out of my way. I'm Plankton, better do as I say.
Oh, is Bikini Bottom's awesome? Is Steve will do a Plankton? Sorry. But as he learns later, this self-centered evil hyperfocus came at the cost of his own personal betterment and the emotions of the people that care about him. Or in most cases, the sole person that cares about him. We already know that Plankton came from a country bumpkin upbringing, as shown in Plankton's army. But despite them being pretty cordial in that episode, turns out that all throughout his childhood, Plankton was constantly mocked and belittled for his high IQ. No one supported him or believed in him or even attempted to understand him. As he stated himself, no one showed him they cared, which explains the mentality he developed throughout his life. While I can't speak for all people, it is widely believed that most people begin their lives as amoral slates who are able to orient their moral compass based on experiences and interactions they share with other people. If they're taught correctly, they develop key moral values, such as justice, charity, and of course, empathy. But if someone's conscience ends up misguided or ignored, like anything that isn't properly tended to, it can easily shrivel up and fade to nothing. Plankton was raised in an isolated place surrounded by nothing but ridicule. He was alone with no one to confide in. So naturally, with such a limited scope of the world and no one showing him true kindness, he'd grow up to be as salty as the sea and hate pretty much everything. He became self-serving, apathetic to others, and extremely determined to prove himself, only looking out for number one since no one else in his life ever bothered to. Heck, even when he does have someone who loves and supports him, someone he literally constructed to feel his pain, he ends up taking her for granted due to his limited experience with empathy and the world relentlessly cutting him no breaks yet again. Now, all of that would be enough to help the audience sympathize with Plankton, but the real challenge comes with fixing his problems. While the movie never goes into anything super deep, it is at least balanced when it comes to handling people who aren't well versed in empathy. Basically, if you know someone in Plankton's size -10 shoes, instead of letting them stew in their misguided ways, help them see the light. Call them out, set them straight, encourage them to seek professional help or some kind of betterment. Heck, there's a whole subplot about therapy and psychoanalysis in this very movie. I'm not saying to go and shove integrated circuitry into your buddies' heads, but do what you can to help them learn what's truly important in life. don't just let jerks be jerks, even if they have understandable reasons for why they act that way. And if you happen to be in Plankton's shoes and are self-aware enough to realize it, then go and get that help yourself. It's important that we not only live our lives for ourselves, but also for the people around us. And even if the world is going to smite us down and refuse to give in, which it often does, personal relationships are one of the main things that can make a life worth living, even if we're left without objective notoriety or success. And whether we come to that conclusion ourselves or need help from others, the sooner we realize this truth, the happier we'll be. Again, it's nothing super complex, but it's executed really well. And not only is Sheldon's moral compass perfectly positioned for growth, but the way he goes about it is just as enjoyable. All throughout this story, we get to see every side of the show's signature baddie, from his cartoony cackling villain side, to his sympathetic stepped-on side, to his wholesome heartfelt side. All of which is brought to life not only by the surprisingly good writing, but also Mr. Lawrence's amazing performance. Doug is this character. He always puts his all into making sure every aspect of the execution that he has control of is just so. His iconic booming voice despite his tiny stature, his guttural screams which can make me crack up on their own, the hammy evilness with a side of egg-headed intelligence, the villainous cackling, and the sheer enthusiasm in his happy moments. I listen to this Copepod talk and all I can picture is Doug having the time of his life behind the microphone. And when he's put in charge of the scripting as well, like with this movie, he ensures that Plankton is the prince of peak portrayals in every aspect. Enjoyably jerky, yet also worthy of condolences. Very smart, but ironically short-sighted. An effective antagonist, but with tons of main character potential too. He's a Swiss Army knife of a single cell, and his movie is loaded with memorable moments for him. Like I said, you got the backstory beats which are super effective, but even the small moments like Plankton gracefully accepting defeat only to awkwardly adjust his mask after forgetting he already cut an eye hole in it, referencing the Thinker during his petty little meltdown, his needlessly complex scheme to get the formula, with him planting gadgets all throughout the Krusty Krab which Krabs obviously catches on to, getting happy, then angry, then happy, then angry again as the empathy chip shorts out, all ending with him genuinely understanding Karen's pain even without the chip. Everything put together just makes for such an entertaining summary of this iconic character, the good and the bad, and that's all I ever really wanted from a Plankton movie.
That's all I ever really wanted.
Really?
Yes.
But hey, a hero is only as good as their opposition, and aside from Plankton tussling with internal conflicts, he's also got his wife to deal with. Yup, Karen is the villain of this picture. And geez, do they pull every freaking stop sign from the ground and try to beat you senseless with it. Karen had one chance to be a true bikini bottom big bad, and she crushed it. Her scheme of magnetizing the chum bucket, turning all of Bikini Bottom's metal components into a massive battlesuit to invade the surface, depriving fishfolk of their entire livelihoods in only a few minutes, splitting herself into a metallic hydra of intelligence, snark, and rage, making for both really funny and really menacing interactions, brushing off the usual nautical nonsense of the series, like Krabs using root beer as weapons to try and stop her which have no effect, making her look even more threatening, singing an electronic villain song where she easily outdoes her husband in both the melody and visuals department, the beginning scene where she actually turns the chum bucket into a successful restaurant, only to have all her hard work get torched by Plankton out of sheer pettiness, which is a perfect final straw that makes her leave him for good. And that beautiful scene at the end where she has a sad reunion with her husband, telling him that it's too late for apologies and unceremoniously giving him the one thing he's been chasing for over 2 decades, expecting him to leave once he hasn't, only for Plankton to smash the bottle and kick the paper aside, not giving one flip about the formula and instead admitting that the true thing he needed was right in front of him all along. Cheesy? Yes. Heart-stoppingly precious and well-earned? Also yes. Honestly, while it is very easy to sympathize with Plankton, whether it be in this movie or in the original series, there are plenty of times where it feels like Karen gets the shorter end of the stick, if that's even possible. She always seems to be secondary in Sheldon's life, and most attempts to further their marriage either have ulterior motives or just reset back to status quo at the end of their respective episodes. And all that context plus what we see in the movie makes for a super satisfying instance of screw it, I'm doing this myself. She puts her foot down right on the little man's head and takes charge of her own evil scheme, with her ex eventually realizing his mistakes and giving her the mutual respect she deserved and desired. and it's so fantastic to witness. I also do like how Plankton and Karen differ in regards to their experiences with empathy. As we already discussed, Plankton's sense of empathy has been warped and underutilized due to multiple years of mistreatment, leading to him becoming egotistical, self-centered, hateful, and, well, evil. But Karen, ever since she was a little TI-108 calculator, has always been shown love by others, mainly Plankton, and has known from the beginning what it's like to give love and receive love in return. This is only amplified by the empathy chip that Plankton installed in her when her new body was constructed. However, as we see in this movie, you can only give so much of yourself before the well runs dry. Karen, having known what true love is her entire life, understands that constantly giving and giving while receiving apathy at best and insults at worst is just not fair. And eventually the pain gets so overwhelming for her that even the chip specifically installed to make her understand Plankton's misery isn't enough anymore, and she's able to just pluck it and chuck it. It's like the equivalent of Plankton metaphorically ripping her heart out and treating her like dirt. And honestly, it's hard to blame her for wanting nothing to do with Plankton until he learns his lesson and truly appreciates her. She's a bundle of diodes, capacitors, and resistors, interconnections, and transistors, but she's also a person deep down. And this movie is by far the most human this metal cube has ever been. An awesome villain, an understandable character, a loving wife, and a deserving partner. We love you, Karen. Not as much as Plankton, but we do. As for the rest of the main cast, they're also utilized well, for the most part. Sandy, Pearl, and Mrs. Puff get time to shine as the Gal Pals, one of the more interesting additions to the show's later seasons. They play a key role in helping Plankton see the error of his ways by shoving that empathy chip where the brain don't feel. Which makes sense since they've been listening to Karen's woes for years at this point and would totally feel for her. They help take down Karen's new triple-threated masterminds while occasionally screwing up, which is hilarious. And it's honestly just fun to see these barely used and often misused side characters getting to be so pivotal in this movie compared to the other ones. This goes double for Sandy, who essentially gets a mini redemption here after her title film was total. Speaking of redemptions, we get another SpongeBob Plankton team-up in this film similar to Sponge Out of Water, but I think this one is so much better. While that movie didn't really capitalize on the dynamic of SpongeBob and Plankton as much as it could have, this movie has constant memorable interactions between the duo that are hilarious, emotional, and as stated before, analytical. SpongeBob is basically Plankton's therapist in this movie, which is a perfect vehicle to show off his helpfulness, ditziness, and goofiness all in one package. He genuinely wants to help Plankton get back together with his wife, and understands that to reach the root of the problem, you need to dig deep inside yourself and understand what's causing the pain. And he's able to use his junior therapist kit to do just that, even if he misinterprets a lot of things along the way, which makes for really great jokes. And it's thanks to this therapist kit that we bear witness to Spongemund Freud, which I adore. The voice, the design, the way they work SpongeBob's usual quirks into the bit, like doing yo-yo tricks with the hypnotist watch, it's probably one of the best running gags in any SpongeBob movie. And like I said before, actually contributes to the plot in a major way. But the crowning moment of SpongeBob's involvement here has to be the way he calls out Plankton in the third act. We get an original movie level outburst here where he uses every technical term in the book to tell Plankton that he is a massive jerk that needs to change his ways. And when it gets to the point that SpongeBob is calling you out, you know that you need to look deep inside yourself and fix things up. SpongeBob doesn't really have an arc of his own, but he honestly doesn't need one. Him being an accessory to Plankton and Karen's story is totally fine since it is their movie, and for what it's worth, he has still done incredible justice. The presentation of this movie from visuals to audio also received a huge upgrade from the previous ones. Not only are the animation and songs eye-catching and earwormy, but they come with some unexpected surprises. There are so many points in the movie where the usual 3D visuals are intercut with these beautifully stylized 2D sequences which highlight major turning points in Plankton's self-assessment, like using a bouncy rubber hose style for his childhood backstory, and this unique yet creepy Beavis and Butthead-esque style to show how his lack of empathy has been hurting his special someone for years. Even Karen gets a piece of the action with their villain song, taking on the look of a Gundam anime with this semi-3D vibe to it. They didn't need to go this hard and far with the aesthetics of a Plankton movie, but dang it they did, and it's so paid off. The songs may not be as classic as SpongeBob's Finest, but they've got some staying power and hummability to them. I Made a New Friend is frankly adorable, even if most of it is spoken word. The dynamic duo of villain songs, as I said, are awesome. Welcome to Bikini Bottom is the opening song. not much to say there. And Plankton even gets his own freaking rock ballad a la Peaches from the Mario movie. And it's equally as hilarious and awesome, with Plankton solemnly contemplating his life choices on strokes of piano, seeming like he's about to realize the error of his ways, only for him to do a full 180 and say, "Yeah, I'm a jerk, that's part of who I am, and I should just embrace it." No, Sheldon, no, you really shouldn't. That's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Honestly, that was probably one of the biggest laughs I had throughout the whole movie. But luckily, it's not the only one. Yeah, what would a decent SpongeBob movie be if it didn't have comedy? And without spoiling too many of the gags, I'll just straight up say that they got it almost perfect. Not every joke is laugh out loud hilarious, but the energy and variety you would expect from a SpongeBob movie is there in full force. Slapstick, wordplay, subversion, dialogue, puns, awkward silences, even some modern season conventions like meme faces, all working in tandem to make for a pretty hysterical time. Heck, there are even some gags that were surprisingly dark for the modern Sponge. Like, I know I promised I wouldn't spoil any of the jokes, but I gotta show you this one. So there's this scene with SpongeBob and Plankton in the bargain mart during Karen's town-wide takeover, and after a bunch of swords come flying at the duo, this happens. Like, they make it clear that there are tomatoes right there before it happens, but jeez, the bit of silence and holding on the shot for a while, out of context, this is pretty dang morbid. They kind of ruin it later with a similar joke in the Krusty Krab, but this right here is comedy platinum. It's just nice to see a SpongeBob property going in so many good directions with its humor. And while I wasn't constantly laughing, I was at the very least smiling and nodding because everything just felt so right. I guess the last thing I'll touch on are the callbacks. The constant references to SpongeBob's golden era in the modern day seasons are usually a sticking point for people, like turning one-off gag characters into mainstays, or even sucking classic jokes dry by overusing them. But I think they do things pretty tastefully here. The movie rarely shoves a reference in your face like, "Hey, remember when you used to think we were cool?" And instead they just use old props as set dressings for certain scenes, like having a bunch of Plankton's old inventions gathering dust in his basement, and having rarely seen locations during montages and song sequences. They're actually subtle with their continuity bits, and as a result, they're fun to point out when you recognize them. Just for some that I remember off the top of my head, there's the bucket helmet and Goofy Goobers from the first movie, Air Plankton from Sponge Out of Water, Cashy from Married to Money, that robotic customer from Plankton's Army, and the Switch Lives Just to Know What It's Like a Lager Fire from Algae's Always Greener. I guess some people might think this is a bad thing since the movie has no problem jangling old school props in your face while blatantly ignoring other pre-established lore, but like I said, the consistency of SpongeBob lore is usually the last thing on my mind when compared to the characters, story, and comedy, and all of those things are done really well here, so I don't mind if they want to sneak in some Easter eggs here and there. So yeah, with everything I mentioned, it seems like this movie did a ton of things right. But if I can be honest for a second, above all else, it's not what this movie did that truly matters, it's what it didn't do. Yeah, remember that tragic truth I said I'd get back to later? Well, after sitting through SpongeBob's 5 feature-length ventures, it's pretty much unavoidable. Especially nowadays, SpongeBob movies just don't want to be SpongeBob movies. It almost feels like they're ashamed to be part of the series or are doing everything they can to be something completely different. Something more contemporary, more mainstream, more attention-grabbing to a wider group of people. The first movie is an obvious outlier here, that's pretty much SpongeBob in its purest form, but Sponge Out of Water kept advertising the superhero scenes above all else as if it was trying to cater to the comic book fads of the time. Sponge on the Run put all its focus into celebrity cameos and modern low random humor when it wasn't just trying to be an ad, and I don't know what they were trying to do with Miss Cheeks' movie, other than desperately try to grab kids' attention using as little quality control as possible. But the main feeling that just kept creeping up on me with each new release is that the creators and or higher-ups are making the spirit of SpongeBob secondary in his own movies, and it drives me up a freaking wall even when I enjoy the movies. But Plankton the Movie is the first time in a long time where a SpongeBob movie has felt unapologetically and unashamedly SpongeBob. The characterization feels like SpongeBob, the heart feels like SpongeBob, the comedy feels like SpongeBob, the creativity feels like SpongeBob, the ingenuity feels like SpongeBob. All this movie had to do was stop trying to pretend it was anything other than what it was. Stop aiming for contemporary widespread appeal and stick with the wholesome evergreen nonsense that makes the franchise so special. Be a SpongeBob movie for corn's sake and embrace the legacy of the awesome cultural milestone you're a part of. And that's exactly what Plankton's flick does. It's far from a perfect movie. It's not even the best thing the modern SpongeBob team has ever put out. But it's a beautiful example of what can happen when the people behind the scenes truly start caring. Yes, I ended on a bad pun. If the movie's gonna be true to itself, then why shouldn't I? So yeah, those are my thoughts on Plankton the Movie. I imagine most of the steam this movie would have had was lost due to the leaks and the cheeks, but I do encourage anyone still holding on to their Netflix subscription to give this a shot. Who knows, it might set an example for future flicks. But until the inevitable Squidward movie comes out, what do you guys think? Were you satisfied with Mr. Lawrence's magnum opus here, or should he have gone back to the blueprints? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I hope to see you all real soon.